Mano,
Por la cuenta de Santa Catalina. ¿Ya te encuentro? ¿Se ve?
y lo que enseña las legiones romanas
What we're looking at now is all thought to be, because this is outside, this is what was finished just at 66 AD. There was the Tower of Nicanor, I think it was called, but it was 261 feet high, and according to Josephus, you could see the Mediterranean and you could see the Mount of Hermon, yeah. So this is all thought to be. It is the north part of Jerusalem. This outcropping of bedrock, a kind of a sea, is the Garden Tomb. And that's where they point out the skull. It was outside the city. And so they think it was the north of the city. There's a big bus station where they'll say probably Stephen was stoned. But the traditional site is over straight ahead where the Jaffa Gate is, and it is outside the city. Now it is inside the city, but it was outside the city under Herod's time. The wall came clear over and then went south. There's the three towers of Herod right straight ahead of us. So you can see the two different ones. And the Via Dolorosa led to that one because I was reading that even before Constantine's mother came, it was Origen from Caesarea who came here in the 200s, and they did some digging, and he announced that they had found where Jesus had been buried. And so even before Constantine's mother came, by 150 years, Origen had found that to be the place. And so
Was the tomb empty when he found it?
yes, it had to be. It had to be. So the outcropping of bedrock, what the Romans wanted was maximum exposure. They wanted where the gate people would be going. You know, the Old Testament, most humane way of killing was stoning. And stoning was thought to be a merciful way because you put them out of their misery quickly. But they could not do stoning in in Roman times because Romans had to have that preserved for them. So that's why they had the meeting to cause him to condemn himself. When Jesus admitted he was the Son of God, then he tore his clothes, as we found out. So the Damascus Gate is strange here. This was the one gate that was built by the latest king, Agrippa, but it goes out of the wall way over here. So this wall was what it was by the time of Herod Agrippa in the just before 66 AD. And as a result, all of this is streets and houses over the top of it, and this is all conjecture, the whole thing. But the north would be where, of course, the Damascus Gate has always pointed. And so that is the Damascus Gate. At this point, that was thought to be the case. But I want you to see here are all the poorer houses. Notice how they're built. Some of them are upper story, but lower ones down there were the most poor. And what you see is the Tyropoeon Valley here that had been completely covering David's city, and the the Kidron Valley's there. The Gehenna Valley's back here, and all of this didn't exist until Hezekiah's time, and that's 700 to 729 BC. And all of that was where the population exploded because he sent people up into the northern tribes inviting them to come to Jerusalem. And many came, Passover, the biggest Passover since the early ones, and they stayed. And all of this was the expansion of the city to the west. And the Romans these were where the wealthy lived. And the path we will see coming down from the top was right where we were. Now, when we were at Gallicantu, they do point Caiaphas' house on top of the lid, but it's clear in Scripture it was Annas' house that he was tried in first. So that apparently was down the level. Maybe this was not proper protocol because they wanted to snag Jesus and make him guilty of blasphemy. But that Tyropean Valley, Cheesemakers Valley, was the limits of David's Jerusalem, and it was like a big foot. And then the added area of the Solomon's Temple was at the top, the northern part of that. So let's go on around a little now. And the dung gate, when this wall was built, it's no longer there, was at this spot where they would bring the dung out. But now today, the wall just comes this side of the Temple Mount and then cuts up through the city as it was. So all of this is outside the city, as was the upper room. And the upper room probably was the ones that we see on the wall. If it had been possible, and tomorrow we will look at it, I think I can point to you where the Gallicantu is and the two windows that would suggest to be the upper room. So it was right on the upper area, and they would come down past the spot where the Hannes's house would be, and it was in the dungeon under Annis's house. Alexander Jannaeus' tomb is here. That was the time of 150 years before Christ, that the Mattathias, who was at Modi'in, was a priest of renown, and he had 5 sons. Judas Maccabeus was one of his sons, and the Syrian legate, the Syrians were in charge, this is before the Romans, had come and came to Modi'in, which was a city of priests, and he insisted that Mattathias sacrifice a pig, and Mattathias refused, and he wouldn't even move. And so what occurred was one of the priests that wanted to please the Syrians took the knife and literally killed the pig, and Mattathias grabbed it and killed him, and that was the uprising of the Maccabean revolt, it's called. His 5 sons began to collect people behind him, and for 100 years the Maccabeans ruled until 63 BC. This was 167. 63 the Romans came because the Maccabeans had divided. When Alexander the Great left no instructions for what was to follow him. He apparently had no son. He died unexpectedly. His 4 generals, Lysimachus, Cassandra, Ptolemy, and Seleucid, divided up the Greek kingdom. And the Seleucidae were the ones that took Syria. So it was the Seleucids of the Greeks, not the Romans, that were trying to control the country. Ptolemies went to Egypt, and the 2 others were in the mainland of Greece. And the Ptolemies and Seleucid fought over Jerusalem, and mainly the Seleucid had been strong enough to hold this town, and so when this part of the country, so when that legate was killed, then there was even one where I can't remember the setting, where the man went under an elephant that had a platform, and he killed the elephant and it fell on him. But that started the rebellion, and for 100 years they controlled the Holy Land until they got to fighting, and the Roman Pompey was able to bring the Roman power in 63 BC. They did have an amphitheater, is where it was built. And all of this was the earlier housing, but on this side of the Tyropean Valley was all Hezekiah's extension of the city. Then it made this way in Roman times. The latest city was the one of Agrippa. So those big buildings are the extent of the time of David. The Kidron Valley, it would be on the right side, and then all of those houses were destroyed, and what we were digging was on the slope of the hill. And we'll go around there. That's where the Gihon Spring was, and they brought it to this side. Now, if you see, there is a pool. That was Hezekiah's pool. He extended because the fall was not enough to bring it inside the wall, so he had to build the lake there. My goodness. And had to extend the wall to put it inside. So it was a gravity-fed stream, 1,777 feet. and it's a sad thing that we can't go through it, but they wound around. We think they were hunting for crevices in the rocks, but they sent two groups from the spring itself and then from this end where they wanted to come. They had to cut it down lower to get the water to even come because they thought it would be higher. And so finally they met each other in the center because they were winding around where the weak stone was, easier to guide, but to dig. But when they were close to each other, they were passing each other. And suddenly, while they weren't working on one side, they heard through a crevice in the rock the mallets, the pounding, and the chisels of the other group. And you can go to that spot, and where they made it, they started digging, then they turned left, and they met each other in the middle. And that was in preparation for the coming of Sennacherib. He came in 705. This was about 701 when Hezekiah knew we're going to possibly be attacked. So it probably took 4 years to make that tunnel possible. So we're looking at now the two stairways that led to the top, so that people from David City and from here, after Solomon was king, could go to the upper city from that spot. If you'll notice right at the corner, there is a bridge that was originally thought to be a bridge to the upper city. There is one farther to the north there, but when excavation was done, they realized it was a platform. There were stairs that led down to David's city, so they corrected it to make sure it would be right. But you can now see where the red and blue arrow is, where the western wall is now, and that was the level of Herod that's still there, where those are, and then of course all of that top was gone except for about the fifth layer up. There's still Herodian stones, but then Muslim stones after that.
This is what you call the Terrible Valley, and there a little one here.
This would be the Gehenna Valley. That's the Tyropean. But inside the Gentile court were 4 rooms in the 4 corners. The forward one was for the women, and another for the lepers, and then for the oil and for the wood for sacrifices. The gate in the center back there, now you see there is a wall that led to the court of the Jews. That's where the pillar was found that condemned anybody but Jews to death if they went inside that second wall. This was the main gate, and they've dug underneath it some time ago and found the one that Herod had built right under this one. This one was, of course, a time of Suleiman. So inside the Jewish court were 4 rooms for oil and wood, for lepers and for women. And then the Nicanor gate, there's a series of round steps. That's where the Levites would sing at certain occasions, and behind it on the left is the horned altar and the laver. So that building in ivory was the 2 rooms only, the rectangular room for the holy place, and the smaller room, square room, for the most holy place, and it was only the Ark of the Covenant that was in that room with a curtain over it. And that now you see the Fortress of Antonio, how the door was there. They could come out and walk completely around the wall and watch what was being done. My understanding is that the money changers were up here, and what they were doing was cheating the people, not giving the proper difference in the exchange of money. And Jesus didn't upset the tables and drove out the animals. I don't think he drove the people out, but it was a matter of saying, my house is a house of prayer, and you've made it a den of thieves because you're robbing. It isn't what you're doing, you're robbing, because they had to exchange money.